Hello everybody, Steve the Amateur Historian here with ya to beat your brains in with more history and fun stuff.
Steve the Amateur Historian.
If you live in the Portland area, like I do, obviously, you've definitely heard of OMSI, the Oregon Museum of Science and Industry. That makes it sound like I'm going to start criticizing it. But no, that's what it is. Even if you're not from Portland, even if you've only visited once or twice, you've probably still potentially heard about it. Or if you come into town, you're like, hey, is there any cool stuff to do in this town? There's like, go get a beer, go hang out in downtown, it's a good time, or go to OMSI. Earlier this, I want to say it was probably end of spring, start of summer, May 2018-ish time, I went to OMSI with my girlfriend and her siblings, just something to do with the day, and never really paid too much attention to the overall make of OMSI, but when we went in there and started walking around, I noticed one of the buildings, because the OMSI complex that exists there now was built in the early 90s, and this building was definitely pre-1990s. One of the main buildings you go into, it's a big brick structure that looks like it dates back like 100 years. And that caught my attention, obviously, as someone who does what I do. And as I found out, it is practically over 100 years old. That building is actually, its original purpose was it was a turbine room as part of a Portland General Electric station that was established on that site back in 1910. Before OMSI was there, it's not like it was just a slab of land next to the Willamette River. There was actually a purpose to that site before then. And this takes us back to the 1840s. This takes us back to not just before Oregon was a state, but this is before Portland was even an established city. This is when it's the Oregon territories. You cross the Columbia River, you're not in Washington, you're still in the Oregon territory. And this little plot of land was originally known as Stevens Addition. It was purchased by a guy who, that was his last name. He owned that land, and he'd established ownership of that way back in the 1840s. He was, like most people who were able to buy, tracts of land in the Portland area, he was a very prominent early Portlander who passed away, I want to say, in 1899. And he had his home there. It was a very prominent historical home. But in addition to him owning that lot, the very first railroad tracks that were run through the city of Portland came through that stretch of land. There's still railroad lines passing through there today. They just go off a little bit east of OMSI. But yeah, there were railroad lines being run through there as early as the 1860s. But then if we jump forward to the late 1880s, we're starting to see this shift. We're starting to see electricity become a more viable thing, a more attainable thing. And we're starting to see, we have early streetcars popping up all over the Portland area, and a lot of these started becoming electrically run. And it helped blossom the east side of Portland. By the late 1880s, there was an electronic company, or electricity, I guess is a better way to put it, that was the Willamette Falls Electric Company, and it was established in Oregon City, and they started running electricity up into Portland. Well, Portland is booming during this time, and they realize that they need more than just electricity getting sent to them from 12, 15 miles away. So they realize they got to start building these stations and substations in their city to deal with the increase. I think from like the 1890s into 1915, Portland's population increased almost fivefold. The overall square mileage of the city almost tripled. I mean, the city was blowing up, and the city couldn't keep up. And ultimately in 1892, Portland General Electric, as it would ultimately become known, they became established to try to deal with this massive need for electricity in the city of Portland. And by 1908, they'd only been around for 15, 16 years. They actually had to become a subsidiary of what would ultimately become known as the Portland Electric and Power Company, or PEPCO, as it would become known as. And this was just another example of how they just had to keep building and building and building to keep up with the power. This big Portland electricity company had been established, and after 15 years, they were already like, we need help. And so this is the end of the first decade of the 1900s, and one of the things that they realize that they need a really strong electrical power source, a big station that is in close proximity to downtown Portland. So they decided on a piece of land on this Stevens Addition property that had more or less just had, the Stevens family home on there, some railroad lines running through, and there was a lumber mill located there, which actually played a significant role in the decision to put a new substation on this site where OMSI stands today. And it was the L station, which means they built several before, Station A, Station B, Station C. And they began construction there in 1910. All the buildings that were on site were built between 1910 and 1929. These later on buildings that came about in the 1920s just became necessary because the moment that station became functional, every year they were having to do more and more and more work and having to churn out more and more electricity. So by the time you got into the 20s, they had to keep adding to the complex. And the lumber mill that was located next door, it was called the Inman-Paulson lumber mill, if I'm correct. And essentially, because they were right next door to each other, they actually reached an agreement with each other that the lumber mill would give the PGE station pretty much, scraps of lumber, leftover lumber that they would use to power their machinery, and in turn, the PGE station there would provide the lumber mill with power so they could function. So they were kind of trading off with each other and utilizing each other to take advantage of, the benefits that the other one had that the other didn't necessarily have. So they worked like that up until 1954 when the lumber mill was closed down. And even by then, they were starting to use that leftover wood. They found that that was actually beneficial in other ventures. So by the 50s, this L station had to start changing how it powered a station. And even by then, this is, about 15 years after the Bonneville Power Authority, I believe they were called, was established. And that's off where like Bonneville Dam is, a little down Columbia River from Portland. And PGE, Portland General Electric, slowly discovered, hey, we can actually save money by purchasing energy from them instead of churning it out ourselves. So the simple fact that the Bonneville Power Authority was a cheaper method to go made maintaining places like the L station down by the river not very cost effective. So, by the 50s, the lumber mill's gone. They're finding out it's costing, more money than it's worth to run this big L station. They started to begin drawing back on the use of that L station. I'm assuming that was the case in many other stations in the Portland area. And even by the 1960s, it pretty much was barely ever being used. It was kind of it was there as like a backup, essentially. And it actually did find final use in 1963. If you know your history, you know that during the 1970s, there was all these, power shortages and gas shortages, everything. There was a shortage everywhere. And they actually had to kind of reactivate that L station that had been sitting more or less unused for several years. They actually had to put it back into action for about 2 months while this energy shortage problem was going on. They had to power that thing back up to kind of compensate for that. But even with that, and kind of nice that the L station was there in 1973 to help with this problem. By 1975, they did officially shut the L station down. And so enters OMSI into the equation. The Oregon Museum of Science and Industry dates back to the 1950s. They actually were stationed in the same building from 1958 till 1992 before they relocated to the PGE L station site where it stands today. So yeah, over 30 years. And it was located at where the I think it's the kind of the Children's Museum is located today. It's literally right across the parking lot from the Oregon Zoo. That is where OMSI was located. So it blew up. It became super popular because of what it was, but also because, it's this place that attracts families and kids, and it's right across the parking lot from the zoo. So, I remember going to the zoo, and then when we'd be done, we'd be zooed out. We'd be going to leave, and my parents would be like, "Oh, you want to go over to OMSI now? Oh, let's go over to OMSI now." And so OMSI, I mean, it's not that big of a building. It was built to hold about 100,000 people kind of annually, and it was doing upwards of like 100,000 people annually. So they were like, we need a bigger, this is blowing up and we need something bigger. And by 1986, they had come to the conclusion, we got to get a new space. This just isn't enough for us anymore. And PGE, because, the L station had been sitting there for over a decade now, just, practically abandoned, it seems. And they donated the land to the cause so that OMSI could begin building there. And they did. And they built this new complex that opened in 1992. It doesn't even feel like it was that long ago, but I guess I remember a lot of elementary school field trips there. And I finished elementary school in 1998. And, obviously that's what stands there today. But it was so cool. Like, I never would have thought to look back at the history of this area, other than the fact that there are a few kind of remains of things that show that it was, the land there served a different purpose at one time. But I probably still wouldn't have thought to really look into it unless, back in May or whenever this trip was we took, I didn't take a look outside at that one building that's still there, still standing. It's that one last vestige of PGE's presence there in that specific area. That was the main section of the L station, was kind of buildings piled together right where OMSI is. And if I had noticed that that one building there absolutely had to predate the 1990s, I probably never would have thought to look any of this up. So that's the inspiration for this video. And actually, a couple months later, it was kind of near the end of summer, so still a few months back, I was just in the area and I decided to pull my camera out and kind of meander around the area and just kind of take in what still exists there, whether it was necessarily PGE, L station related or not. Stuff that's in that area that clearly predates the construction of the new OMSI back in 1992. So I'm going to bring that video to you now. I started researching because I noticed one of the old buildings at OMSI, which is right down there, is it's clearly like an old warehouse type building, and you can tell from looking inside. And I don't know if this is in relation to it, but I mean, this looks pretty old. Whatever this is from, I don't see is there a plaque? I don't know. I just got interested for a second because this area where OMSI now stands is where Portland General Electric, like one of their main areas, was right here, and there's actually some remains of it. So everything I see, I'm like, is that a remain? I doubt it, because now I'm seeing another one of these things. So they're interesting, but I don't know what their historical value is. We have another remaining piece of the pre-OMSI time, which is this building right here ahead of me, that kind of dangles underneath the freeway crossing the bridge over to the west side. definitely items still inside this building. I don't know what it's being used for, but it's definitely an older building. It's definitely seen better days. I don't want to know where that door leads to. But yeah, and then you literally got the support posts for the freeway, like right up against the building. You know, so you better be powerful. You're holding a lot of weight. So I'm gonna head over now more towards the front of this building so you can see the marker on the front. And of course, welcome to OMSI, everybody. Yep, and it even says right here, land donated by Portland General Electric. Here's the front side of the building, and you've got this marker here, Pepco, 1927, long before OMSI was around. And this whole area was just lined with electrical buildings to help PGE function, and just over time I guess they didn't need this particular area anymore. It kind of fell into disuse, and so there was just not a lot sitting here, and you know, it was a perfect opportunity to relocate OMSI, which OMSI used to be located next to the Oregon Zoo, in the building that is now the Children's Museum. So, used to be way off on the other side of the West Hills there, but this is definitely a much larger, impressive complex. I don't really know what else out here is of any historical value, however, what in the devil is this thing? Woo! Hello, you. It almost looks like an alien's face. I'm guessing this at one time or another was part of the rage. Now it's used to, oh man, somebody was sleeping in here with the cardboard. I don't know what that chunk of concrete's in here for, but someone was definitely sleeping in here. I don't know what this is. It's, but you have to wonder if it was part of something that was probably here long before OMSI decided to show up in this neighborhood. I honestly was here in town, this general area, to do something else completely, and you find stuff like that. And this is interesting too. I kind of saw this tower. I'm wondering if this is a remain. Maybe not. It's just, we have an electrical tower with no wires connected to it. Nothing leading to another tower over there or back to another tower back here. So I'm wondering if this is somehow some kind of a leave behind from the days of Portland General Electric being here. I don't know. But yeah, we have a tower that doesn't go to anything anymore. And then you've got this little building under it with an AC that probably doesn't work anymore. You've got wires long since chopped away. But yeah, this is not connected to anything. I don't think it's being like repurposed. But yeah, I'm wondering if these are just old buildings connected to the old setup. Like, what else would they be? Can I see through here? Nope, just wire. Nope. Well, you got this old building here. You've got two old buildings that don't look like they're really being used for anything. I mean, this window's boarded up, and it's right under this old tower. I'm like, and you have, oh man, it's like monkey bars. Yeah, and all these old cut-off wires, and this which is not funneling water well these days. And this, we got some metal, like, it's a spear. Oh God. Yeah. This is very interesting. And this is old. Like, look at this. This looks like an old house, you know, down by the river. Just curious enough. A bathroom, apparently. Oh man. Overtaken by other species. I love these old types of lights, though. But yeah, this is definitely an old building. There's lots of old boxes here on them. It's a very interesting piece of history. Yeah, boarded up from the inside. So this building's probably just been sitting here for a while. And then you've got OMSI right here. I'm guessing these probably dated back to the old place. And now it looks like they're just kind of throwing a bunch of stuff in there. There is a whiteboard in there with some writing on it. So maybe this is maybe this is like a meeting building or something. But it's old. It definitely dates back to when PGE was here. And then they backed their trucks full of who knows what. And so while most of OMSI is a somewhat new building, it dates back to the 90s, you notice this part is much older looking. And this is kind of the kids, you know, kind of explore, play with science area. But you'll note there's a drastic difference between the structural style of this building and then the rest of OMSI over here. And it's because this is an old PGE building that they kept here. And I don't know, I'm very much just grasping at straws at this point, because I know this place was just a plethora of Portland General Electric buildings. And I'm seeing this building across the street and wondering. You've got the old, like, power station over there. This building looks very old. And this would have been the vicinity of where PGE would have been having buildings. So yeah, I'm wondering, this could be one of their old buildings. It's definitely old enough. You've got a little power station right over here, and then OMSI literally right across the street. So this was the, you know, right the other side of this spot, you have that big old building that used to be connected to them. And then right here you have this. I'm assuming that's new up there. Yeah. This very much could be a building dating back to that time. Yeah, with top, so you got this old power station here too. You've got more like electrical influence, and it's on the same property as this building. And this, I'm guessing, is probably an old brick wall, but it's been repainted, so it kind of has a little bit of that new shimmer. And then you start getting towards the edge of OMSI. There's a theater. And there's actually a train museum over here, which is pretty cool. And it looks like this brick wall just kind of wraps and wraps and wraps. But yeah, so you've got all this electricity, all these wires running through, and then there was that big tower back there that was over those two buildings, and there was no wires connecting to it. And I'm like, these are right next to it, and there's no wires connected? That's gotta be some kind of a leave behind memorial or something. This guy just set his horn off. Yeah, but anyway, so you see, you got a few more buildings here, but essentially the railroad tracks cross over. You've got OMSI over here taking up a lot of space. I say that like it's a negative thing. And the east side, so this is kind of the fringe end of the east side historical district because everything starts meandering you back towards the highway. You've got all these overpasses and there's literally no more room for buildings. So I've come to the end. A successful trek with a little bit of history. So, hope you guys enjoyed that little extension to the end of the video, my little walk through what little is left in the OMSI area in relations to the old PGEL station. I mean, there's actually a few interesting little things out there to be seen, some of which may not still be there, such as that weird metal, look like a friggin' iron giant's face that I found out there. But still, you know, the history just kind of lingers in and around OMSI, and I think that's really, really cool that that's all still there. And yeah, OMSI can be a pretty cool place to go to as well. Just realize you're going to be surrounded by a lot of kids, so there's going to be a lot of noise, and you're probably going to end up getting sick. You've been warned. Anyway, till next time, guys, this has been Steve the Amateur Historian, and I'll see you next time.